My name is Eleanor McCullough, but everyone around here calls me Grandma Ellie. I'm 78 years old, born in February 1946 in Cedar Springs, a small town nestled deep in the Appalachian foothills of Kentucky. Back then, the sun scorched the red, clay earth, leaving it cracked and dusty, and families hid behind high porch railings and even heavier silences. I'm sharing my story because some secrets burn the soul until they force their way out. This is one of those, a story of family, pain, and the long, winding road to healing told, so it's never repeated. It's not easy to share, as it touches on family pressure and emotional trauma, but I hope it brings light to someone out there, maybe someone who feels trapped in their own silence. I sent this story to the Echoes of Real Lives channel, asking them to change personal details to protect my privacy, and they kindly agreed. I'm grateful for their understanding and for giving me a space to share. I grew up in an era when women were expected to be seen, not heard. Children obeyed without question, and patriarchs ruled like kings over their own small worlds. My family looked blessed from the outside, a shining example of prosperity and togetherness in Cedar Springs. Our sprawling farm, with its endless fields of corn and beans, was the envy of the county. But inside those four walls, shadows lingered, secrets that still wake me in the night, my heart racing, my skin damp with a cold sweat. This is the story of how I survived those shadows, found a flicker of hope, and learned to break the silence that bound me. My father, William McCullough, was a towering figure in our community, a landowner whose fields stretched beyond the horizon, dotted with grazing cattle and neat rows of crops. To outsiders, we were proof that hard work and family loyalty brought God's favor. Neighbors would tip their hats as father drove his blue Ford truck into town, his name spoken with respect at the general store or the First Baptist Church. But sometimes, family is just a pretty word that hides the deepest fears within a home's walls. Father was tall, broad-shouldered, with hands calloused from years of wrestling the land into submission. His voice commanded obedience without ever needing to be raised, a low rumble that carried the weight of law. His small, piercing eyes seemed to see through you, catching lies before they were spoken, and his presence filled every corner of our home like the scent of wood smoke after a long day's work. He wore a simple work shirt, always pressed, a leather-brimmed hat weathered by sun and rain, and boots that made a distinct clomp on the farmhouse's wooden floors, announcing his approach long before he appeared. That sound, those boots on, the boards, became a signal, a rhythm that set the pace of our days and the boundaries of our lives. Father wasn't just my dad. He was the absolute head of our family, a patriarch who shaped our world with an iron will. Our family grew in a unique way, one that made our farm feel like a small village unto itself. Besides me, the only girl, there were 15 boys and young men living on our property, all called his sons, though not all were his by blood. From the time I was a little girl, barely tall enough to reach the kitchen counter, Father held a deep belief in family duty. If a brother fell on hard times, a cousin was orphaned, or a distant relative had nowhere to leave their sons, he'd open our home. Family helps family, he'd say, his voice firm with conviction, his eyes daring anyone to disagree. A man who respects himself doesn't let his blood go without. So over the years, our house filled with boys. My 3 brothers, from his first marriage, John, Paul, and Michael. 5 sons with my stepmother, Anthony, Francis, Joseph, Manuel, and Robert, and 7 cousins from families broken by mining accidents, poverty, or secrets no one ever shared with me. Our home was a sprawling structure, built like an old plantation house, with 3 wings connected by long, creaking hallways and wraparound, porches shaded by ancient oaks that whispered in the evening breeze. The main wing held my parents' room, its heavy door always closed. The parlor with its worn velvet chairs and a faded rug, the dining room with a long oak table polished to a shine, and the big kitchen where our cook, Miss Clara, worked miracles. The kitchen was the heart of the house, filled with the aroma of cornbread baking in a cast-iron skillet, beans simmering in a pot, and the faint tang of wood smoke from the hearth. Miss Clara, a stout woman with a quick laugh and flour-dusted aprons, prepared hearty meals for nearly 20 people every day, her hands moving with a rhythm that matched the ticking of the old clock on the wall. The East Wing was for the older, boys, a place of low voices and closed doors, where men's talks happened, secrets I was never allowed to hear, decisions made far from my ears. The West Wing housed the younger boys, their rooms smaller, their lives governed by the older one's strict watch, in a hierarchy father established from the start to keep order in a house bursting with energy. The hallways echoed with the sounds of boots, laughter, and the occasional sharp reprimand. But they fell silent when father walked through, his presence like a storm cloud passing over the sun. As the only girl, I had my own room in the main wing, right next to my parents'. It was a small sanctuary, a place where I could breathe, if only for a moment. The room had a white iron bed with a quilt sewn by my grandmother, its patches faded but soft, a fine wooden dresser carved with delicate flowers, and a single window overlooking the inner yard. Through that window, I'd watch the chickens scratch in the dust, their feathers catching the sunlight, or see the boys hauling water from the well, their voices carrying across the yard. I spent afternoons there, sewing patches on the boys' work shirts, mending socks, or writing in a small notebook I kept hidden under my mattress, a place to pour out thoughts I couldn't say aloud. My stepmother, Rose McCullough, came from Tennessee when I was 2, marrying father after his first wife passed. She was petite, with delicate features and a quiet strength that showed in the way she moved, always busy, always purposeful. She tended the vegetable garden, where beans, tomatoes, and squash grew in neat rows, organized meals with a precision that rivaled father's, and mended clothes for all those men, her needle flashing in the lamplight. Her small hands smelled of lye soap and lavender, a scent that lingered in the air when she smoothed my hair during quiet moments in the kitchen. Her touch a rare comfort in a house ruled by order. Mama Rose was kind but distant, her eyes often fixed on some far-off point, as if lost in memories she never shared. She never spoke of her life before the farm, as if it had vanished the day she stepped into father's world. Our home ran like a Swiss clock, each day ticking by with unyielding precision. Every morning at 5 a.m., father rang a brass bell on the porch, its sharp clang slicing through the dawn mist, waking the house like a call to prayer. The boys tumbled out of bed, pulling on work boots to tend livestock, plow fields, or harvest, crops that sustained us through the seasons. I stayed inside, learning a woman's work, kneading dough for biscuits, scrubbing clothes in a tin wash tub until my hands were raw, watering the garden where the earth smelled of life and promise. It was a hard life, but it felt normal then, woven into the fabric of my days. I didn't know there was another way to live, and the rhythm of chores kept my hands busy and my mind quiet, like a lullaby that dulled the edges of my questions. Father controlled everything with an iron will, his authority as unyielding as the red clay under our feet. He decided what we wore: plain, sturdy clothes for the boys, modest dresses for me, always buttoned high to cover my neck and ankles. He chose what food was served, ensuring no plate went empty, but no extravagance was allowed, each meal a testament to his frugality. He assigned the boys tasks, from milking cows at dawn to repairing fences under the midday sun, and even set their bedtimes, the house falling silent by 9 p.m. No one left the property or had visitors without his permission. Laughter was kept low, voices hushed in his presence, as if the air itself bent to his will. His control over me was even stricter, a cage built of rules and expectations. I couldn't talk privately with the boys, not even my brothers, or step into the yard without Mama Rose nearby. My dresses had to be modest, the hems brushing the floor, the collars high enough to choke any hint of impropriety. A decent woman gives no cause for gossip, Father would say, his voice heavy with expectation, his eyes locking onto mine until I nodded in agreement. I learned to move carefully, to speak softly, to keep my thoughts hidden like the notebook under my mattress. The boys ranged in age, each group distinct in their roles, their personalities shaped by Father's hand. John and Paul, in their early 20s, were Father's right-hand men, helping manage the farm's business, selling cattle at the market, negotiating with suppliers in town. They were tall, bearded, with hands rough from work, treated almost like partners by Father. They were allowed to go to Cedar Springs on Saturdays, returning before dark with no bad influences, their pockets jingling with coins from small errands. The middle boys, like Michael, Anthony, and Francis, aged 15 to 19, were the rowdiest, testing Father's patience with their pranks and whispered dreams of the outside world, cities like Louisville or Cincinnati, places they'd only heard about in passing. Yet they were fiercely loyal to Father, mimicking his stern demeanor, their voices echoing his when they spoke of duty. The youngest, aged 10 to 14, were a mix of my younger brothers and cousins, living in constant fear of doing wrong. Disobedience meant extra chores, skipped meals, or a strapping with Father's leather belt. It'd snap a sound that made us all flinch. A man who won't listen to reason listens to pain, Father would say, and everyone knew he meant it, the lesson etched into their silence. Our farm was an hour from Cedar Springs, down a dirt road that turned to mud in spring rains and dust, in summer droughts, winding through hills thick with pine and sycamore. We were isolated, a self-contained world, like a small country with its own laws and customs. Father liked it that way, his voice firm when he spoke of town's dangers. Cedar Springs has too many temptations, he'd say, his eyes narrowing. Too many bad influences, people not worth knowing. Here I know who comes, who goes, what everyone does. My family is safe from the outside world. And it was true. We were cut off from town's gossip, its churches, its bustle, the only sounds the lowing of cattle, the creak of the windmill, and the distant hum of cicadas. But no one protected me from the world inside that house, from the heavy silences that fell when Father left for town, leaving a void that filled with something darker. Life went on this way for years, each day blending into the next, marked by the bell, the chores, the meals around the long oak table where Father sat at the head, his presence anchoring us all. But when I turned 14 in March 1960, something shifted, like a crack forming in the earth beneath my feet. I woke one Friday with a heaviness in my chest, a feeling I couldn't name, as if the air itself was pressing down, thick with unspoken warnings. At breakfast, Father was quieter than usual, his fork scraping the plate as he spoke in low tones with John and Paul about business. "I'll be gone most of the afternoon," he said, stirring his coffee, the spoon clinking against the mug. "Bank business and some paperwork at the county clerk's office. John, you're in charge." Fridays were when Father handled the week's affairs in Cedar Springs, a routine as familiar as the sunrise. He'd dress in his best white shirt, new denim pants, and polished leather boots, slicking back his hair with pomade before climbing into his blue Ford truck, its engine growling to life. That morning, as he prepared to leave, I noticed the boys exchanging glances, their voices hushed, their movements restless, as if they shared a secret I wasn't part of. It unsettled me, like a shadow passing over the sun, but I pushed the feeling aside, focusing on my chores, the familiar weight of routine grounding me. When the truck's engine roared, kicking up a cloud of red dust that hung in the still air. Like a curtain, the house fell into a silence unlike any other. It wasn't the usual quiet of work and routine. It was thick, charged, like the moment before a storm breaks, the air heavy with the scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen. Mama Rose went to the kitchen without a word, her apron tied tight, her hands already moving to scrub pots. I followed to help with the breakfast dishes, scrubbing plates in the chipped porcelain sink, the warm water soothing my hands but not my mind. I could feel the boys' eyes on me, watching in a way that made my skin crawl, their whispers stopping when I turned to look, their faces blank but their eyes sharp. "Mama, can I go tend the chickens?" I asked, my voice small, needing to escape the tension that clung to the air like damp laundry. "You can, child, but don't be long," she replied, her voice soft but distracted, her eyes fixed on the pot she was scrubbing. "We need to bake the week's bread today." I stepped into the yard, the familiar cluck of hens and rustle of leaves underfoot grounding me for a moment. The air smelled of earth and hay, the sun warm on my face as I gathered eggs, placing them carefully in a wicker basket, their shells smooth against my fingers. I tried to focus on the task, counting each egg, but the unease lingered, a shadow I couldn't shake. The boys moved in small groups across the yard, their heads bent together, their voices low, stopping when I passed by. It was as if a conversation was happening just out of my reach, a current I could feel but not touch. About 2 hours after Father left, as I stood in the chicken coop, my brother Michael appeared in the doorway. He was 17, tall and lanky, his face usually open with a boyish grin that had always made me feel safe. But that day, his voice was different, low, hesitant, almost nervous, like he was carrying a weight he didn't want. "Ellie, come with me," he said, his eyes avoiding mine. "There's something you need to learn." His words sent a chill through me, sharp and cold, like stepping into the creek in early spring. "What is it, Michael?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Did something happen?" "Just come," he said, his tone flat, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. I set the basket down, my hands shaking so badly an egg nearly slipped, and stepped back, my heart pounding. "Michael, I don't understand." "Learn what?" "You're 14 now, Ellie," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's time you learned your place in this family." The words hit like a bucket of cold water, stealing my breath. I turned to run toward the house, my feet slipping on the dirt, but he was faster, catching my arm, not roughly, but with a firmness that left no room for choice. "Running won't help," he said, his grip steady. "Mama's busy in the kitchen. She knows this is part of growing up." "Growing up?" I asked, tears stinging my eyes. "What are you talking about?" "You'll see," he said, leading me across the yard, past the garden where the tomato plants swayed in the breeze, to the back of the house where a storage room stood, its door rarely opened. It was where Father kept old tools, feed sacks, and odds and ends that didn't fit in the barn, a place I'd rarely ventured. My heart pounded as we approached, the door looming like a gate to somewhere I didn't want to go. Michael pushed it open, the hinges creaking, revealing a space. That wasn't the cluttered shed I remembered. Someone had cleared it, placing a thin mattress on the dirt floor, its edges frayed, and hanging a faded curtain over the small, grimy window. The air inside was stale, heavy with the smell of dust and old wood, and it felt wrong, like it had been prepared for something I couldn't understand. "Michael, why are we here?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, my hands clutching the hem of my dress. "This is where you learn what it means to be a woman in this family," he said, his voice flat, his eyes still avoiding mine. Before I could protest, other footsteps echoed in the hallway, heavy and deliberate. John appeared, his face hard, his broad shoulders filling the doorway. Behind him came Paul, Anthony, and Francis, their faces a mix of resolve and unease. One by one, the older boys gathered, forming a semicircle around the door, their shadows stretching across the floor. "What's happening?" I asked John, my voice trembling, my hands cold despite the warm March air. "You're going to learn your place, Ellie," he said, his voice calm but unyielding. "To serve the family that takes care of you." "I don't understand," I said, tears spilling down my cheeks, my mind racing to make sense of their words. "You don't need to understand now," John replied, his eyes steady like father's. "You just need to obey." He pushed me gently but firmly into the room, and the door closed with a sharp click that echoed like a gunshot in my ears. I stood there, trembling, my back pressed against the rough wooden wall, trying to make sense of it all. From outside, I heard low voices, whispers, as if they were organizing something I wasn't meant to know, their words muffled but heavy with intent. What happened in that room that day broke something inside me, a piece of who I was that I'd never get back. I won't share the details. Some pains are too deep for words, too heavy to lay bare, like a wound that never fully heals. I was left alone, my heart racing, my body shaking, waiting for it to end, waiting for the sound of Father's truck to signal relief. Hours passed, measured not by the hands of a clock, but by the weight of fear and silence, each moment stretching into eternity. The curtain blocked the sunlight, casting the room in a dim, oppressive glow, and the air grew thick, suffocating, as if the walls themselves were closing in. I clung to the sound of the world outside, the distant cluck of chickens, the rustle of leaves, trying to anchor myself to something familiar, something safe. Finally, at dusk, when the sky beyond the curtain burned orange and purple, I heard the rumble of Father's truck coming up the dirt road, its engine a lifeline pulling me back from the edge. The door opened and John helped me out, his voice calm but cold. "This is how it's always been for women in our family," he said, his words cutting deeper than any blade. "And Father knows." Those words shattered everything I believed about love, protection, and home, like a mirror breaking into 1,000 pieces, each shard reflecting a truth I wasn't ready to face. I stumbled back to the main house, my legs weak, my mind reeling, the familiar hallways now strange and threatening, the shadows longer than before. Mama Rose was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of stew, the steam rising in curls around her face. "Go wash up and change, Ellie," she said, her eyes not meeting mine, her voice as flat as the day before. There was no surprise, no concern, as if she knew where I'd been and why, as if it was just another chore to be done. At supper, Father sat at the head of the table, his presence filling the room as he talked about cattle prices, the weather, and the slow-coming rain. The boys nodded, their voices low, the clink of forks against plates the only sound breaking the silence. I tried to eat, but the food stuck in my throat, tasteless and heavy. When Father noticed my silence, he leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Ellie, you're quiet today. Something wrong?" Before I could speak, John answered, his voice steady. "She learned about responsibility today, Father." Father nodded, a faint smile on his lips, as if it was exactly what he expected, as if my silence was a sign of obedience, not pain. That night, lying in my bed, staring at the dark ceiling, the quilt pulled tight around me, I realized there was no escape. Father's word was law on that farm, absolute and unchallenged, and that law included what happened in that room every Friday he was gone. The house I'd called home felt like a prison, its walls closing in, the creak of the floorboards, a reminder of my confinement. I thought of my notebook, hidden under the mattress, and wished I could write it all down, but the words felt too heavy, too dangerous, even for those secret pages. The weeks that followed were a fog, each day blurring into the next. I went through my chores, kneading dough in the kitchen, the flour dusting my hands like snow, washing clothes in the tin tub, the water turning gray with dirt, tending the garden where the earth smelled of life but offered no comfort. But my mind was trapped in that room, replaying John's words, the click of the door, the weight of those hours. The boys treated me differently now, less like a sister and more like someone who existed to serve them. Michael, once my kind brother who'd shared apples from the orchard, began ordering me around with a new authority, his voice sharp. "Ellie, fetch me water," he'd say, or "Ellie, my shirt needs washing." His tone was casual, but it carried a weight that made my stomach churn, a reminder of my new place in the family. The other boys followed suit, their glances lingering too long, their hands brushing my shoulder in ways that felt wrong, their laughter carrying a new edge. Mama Rose saw it all but said nothing, her silence louder than any words, her eyes fixed on her tasks as if she could will the truth away. Each Friday brought the same dread, a knot in my stomach that tightened with every tick of the clock. When Father announced he was heading to town, whether for cattle sales in Lexington or paperwork in Frankfort, I felt my legs turn to jelly, my breath catching in my throat. "I'll be back by evening," he'd say, adjusting his hat, his boots clomping across the porch. The sound of his truck fading down the dirt road was like a signal for the nightmare to begin again. I'd be led to that room, the door would close, and I'd endure hours of fear and shame, my mind clinging to the distant sounds of the farm, the lowing of cattle, the creak of the windmill, trying to escape into them. I learned to expect it, to brace myself, but each time left me more hollow, more distant from the girl I used to be, like a tree losing its leaves one by one until only bare branches remained. Yet in that darkness, I began to watch for a way out, my eyes sharpening like a deer sensing danger. I noticed not all the boys were the same. Some avoided my gaze, their faces tight with discomfort, as if they were acting out of duty, not desire, their hands trembling as they turned away. One boy stood out. My cousin Charlie, a quiet 15-year-old who'd come to live with us 3 years, earlier after his father died in a mining accident in Harlan County. Charlie was different, his eyes soft and sad, his shoulders hunched as if carrying a weight too heavy for his frame. He never joined in on Fridays, always making excuses, sickness, tiredness, a sudden need to check the creek or mend a fence, and disappearing before anyone could press him. The others mocked him, calling him soft or weak, their voices sharp with contempt, but John let it slide, perhaps because Father's return was always near, or because he saw no threat in Charlie's quiet rebellion. Charlie kept to himself, a shadow among the boisterous boys. At meals he ate in silence, his eyes fixed on his plate, as if trying to vanish into the grain of the wood. During chores, he worked alone, hauling water or chopping wood with a focus that set him apart. At night, while the others laughed on the porch, trading stories under the flicker of kerosene lamps, he'd slip away, sitting alone under the big oak tree in the yard, staring at the stars as if they held answers he couldn't find on the farm. I watched him from my window, his slumped shoulders and faraway gaze mirroring my own longing for escape, and I began to see him as my hope, a crack in the wall of that house's cruelty, a flicker of light in the darkness. I started observing Charlie more closely, noting his habits, his movements, the way he flinched when John's voice grew sharp. I learned his mother was alive in Louisville, struggling to make ends meet after his father's death, unable to bring him to her. Charlie never spoke of her, But I saw the pain in his eyes when the other boys mentioned their families, a wound that hadn't healed. I began to wonder if he saw our home as a refuge or a prison, if he felt the same suffocation I did, if he too dreamed of a way out. One Tuesday morning in April, I got my chance to speak with him. Mama Rose sent me to the creek to fetch water for washing clothes, the bucket heavy in my hands as I walked the narrow paths through the pines. The creek sparkled in the morning light, its ripples catching the sun, and there was Charlie, sitting on the bank, his feet dangling in the cool water, staring at nothing. His shirt was patched, his boots scuffed, and his face carried a quiet sadness that made my heart ache. "Hi, Charlie," I said, keeping my voice soft, setting the bucket down to fill it. He startled as if caught doing something wrong, his eyes darting to mine. "Hi, Ellie. I was just leaving." "No need," I said, offering a small smile. "The creek's big enough for both of us." We sat in silence for a moment. The only sounds, the ripple of water and the distant call of a crow high in the trees. I filled my bucket slowly, the water splashing against the tin, buying time to find the right words. My heart pounded, but I knew this was my chance, perhaps my only one. "Charlie," I said finally, "do you like living here?" He looked at me, surprised, his eyes wide with something like fear, as if I'd touched a nerve he kept hidden. "Why do you ask?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just curious," I said, keeping my tone light, my hands steady on the bucket's handle. "It must be hard, being away from your mother." His face softened, and tears glistened in his eyes, catching the sunlight. He looked away, his fingers tracing circles in the water, his voice so soft I had to lean closer to hear. "Sometimes I dream she comes for me," he whispered. "But she can't even afford the bus fare to visit." "And if you could leave, would you?" I asked, my heart racing, knowing I was stepping onto dangerous ground. He met my eyes, searching for my intent, his brow furrowed. "Why are you asking, Ellie? If someone hears—" "No one's listening," I said, glancing around to ensure we were alone, the pines shielding us from the farm. "It's just us." He was quiet for a long time, his fingers still in the water, his breath uneven. "I'd run," he said finally, his voice breaking. "I'd leave today if I could." "Why?" I pressed, though I already knew, my heart pounding with the weight of what I was about to say. "You know why?" he said, his face flushing with shame, his eyes dropping to the creek. "What happens here? It's not right." I took a deep breath, my hands trembling on the bucket's handle, the cold metal grounding me. "You know about Fridays, don't you?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. "What happens when Father's gone?" He nodded, his face crumpling as if the weight of the truth was too much to bear. "John says it's part of being a man in this family," he said, his voice thick with disgust. "But I can't do it, Ellie. It's wrong what they do to you. It's not right." Relief flooded through me, so strong I nearly collapsed onto the creek bank, the grass soft beneath my feet. I'd found someone who saw the truth, who felt the same weight I did, who might be my ally in a house where I had none. "Charlie," I said, my voice shaking with nervousness, "I'm trying to find a way out, but I can't do it alone. Will you help me?" He hesitated, fear flickering in his eyes, his hands clenching into fists. "If they find out," he said, his voice trailing off, his gaze darting to the path behind us. "They won't," I said, my voice firm despite my fear. "We'll be careful. No one will know." "What do you need me to do?" he asked, his voice small but steady, like a candle flame in a storm. "I don't know yet," I admitted, the words spilling out in a rush. "But I need someone inside the family, someone they trust, who knows it's wrong. When I have a plan. Will you help?" He looked at the water, then back at me, his jaw set with a determination I hadn't seen before. "Yes," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. "I'll help." From that moment, hope took root, small but stubborn, like a wildflower pushing through cracked earth. Over the next weeks, we planned in secret, speaking only when no one was near. By the creek, in the garden, under the guise of pulling weeds, during brief moments when the others were distracted by chores or meals. I learned more about Charlie, piecing together his story from the fragments he shared. His mother was in Louisville, working long hours in a textile factory, saving every penny in hopes of bringing him to her someday. He carried a faded photograph of her in his pocket, its edges worn from constant handling, a reminder of a life he'd lost. He never spoke of her to the others, but with me, his words were a quiet confession, each one a step toward trust. I also learned Father cared deeply about his reputation in Cedar Springs. He was a deacon at the First Baptist Church, his name spoken with respect at the feed store and the county fair. He'd tip his hat to widows, donate to the church fund, and shake hands with the sheriff, his smile broad but calculated. If the town learned what happened on our farm, he'd be forced to stop, unable to bear the shame of whispers spreading through the pews or the general store. That was our leverage, the key to our plan, but it was a dangerous one. John was watchful, his eyes sharp, and any hint of betrayal could make things worse. More Fridays, more hours in that room, more pieces of me broken. Our plan was simple but risky, born of desperation and whispered conversations. I'd write a letter, vague enough to protect us but clear enough to raise questions, and Charlie would deliver it to someone in town, a pastor, a teacher, the sheriff, anyone who'd listen. We knew we had to move carefully, our moments stolen in the gaps of the farm's routine. I began watching the boys more closely, noting their patterns, their habits, the moments when they were distracted. John was always vigilant, his presence like Father's, but he was busiest in the afternoons, overseeing the older boys in the fields. Paul was less attentive, more focused on his own tasks, and the younger boys were too scared to notice much. Those were our windows, brief but enough to plan. Each Friday the dread returned, a knot in my stomach that tightened with every tick of the clock in the kitchen. When Father announced he was heading to town, Lexington for cattle sales, Frankfort for land documentation, or Cedar Springs for supplies, I felt my legs weaken, my breath catching like a trapped bird. "I'll be back by evening," he'd say, adjusting his hat, his boots clomping across the porch to the truck. The sound of the engine fading down the dirt road was like a death knell signaling the start of another nightmare. I'd be led to that room, the door would close, and I'd endure hours of fear and shame, my mind clinging to the distant sounds of the farm, the lowing of cattle, the creak of the windmill, the chatter of chickens, trying to escape into them, to hold on to something that felt alive. Each time left me more hollow, my reflection in the dresser mirror a stranger, her eyes dull, her face older than her 14 years. But in those moments of waiting, I began to observe, to think, to plan. I noticed more about the boys, how some, like Anthony, seemed reluctant, their faces tight with guilt as they left the room, their hands trembling as they avoided my gaze. Others, like John and Paul, acted with cold authority, their voices clipped, as if it was their right, a duty passed down like the farm itself. I learned to read their patterns, to anticipate their movements, to find moments when I could slip away to speak with Charlie, our conversations brief but urgent, like sparks in dry grass. Charlie was my lifeline, his quiet rebellion a mirror to my own. I noticed he was treated differently by the others, not with open cruelty, but with a subtle contempt that marked him as an outsider. At meals, he got the smallest portion, the toughest cut of meat, his chair the one that wobbled. During chores, he was given the heaviest tasks, hauling water from the well until his shoulders ached, chopping wood until his hands blistered. When the boys told stories on the porch, their voices loud with laughter, they never included him, their eyes sliding past him as if he wasn't there. It wasn't accidental, I realized. There was something about Charlie, his quietness, his refusal to conform, that made them uneasy, a threat to the order they upheld. One Friday in late April, as Father headed to Frankfurt for land documentation, Charlie saw his chance. The older boys were in the fields, the younger ones scattered across the farm, and John was distracted, arguing with Paul over a broken fence. Charlie slipped away, taking a dirt path through the woods to Cedar Springs, a 2-hour walk under the cover of pines and sycamores. He carried my letter, folded tight in his pocket, its words written in the dead of night by the light of a single candle. I'd been careful, my handwriting shaky but deliberate. There are things happening on the McCullough farm that shouldn't. Women aren't safe. Please help. I didn't sign my name, but I poured my fear into those words, praying they'd find someone who'd listen. Charlie returned before Father, his face pale but determined, his boots caked with mud. We passed in the yard, pretending to focus on our chores, me carrying a basket of eggs, him hauling a bucket of water. "I gave it to Mrs. Thompson," he whispered, his eyes darting to ensure no one was near. "The pastor's wife at First Baptist. She said she'd read it and talked to the sheriff." I nodded, my heart pounding, the basket heavy in my hands. "Thank you, Charlie," I said, my voice barely audible. He nodded back, his eyes holding mine for a moment, a silent pact sealed between us. Days turned to weeks, and at first, nothing happened. I began to fear the letter had been ignored, tossed aside like so many of my hopes. The Fridays continued, each one a weight I carried alone, my mind clinging to Charlie's promise, to the possibility of change. I kept up my chores, my hands moving through the motions, kneading dough, washing clothes, tending the garden. But my eyes were always searching, watching for a sign that our plan had worked. Then one morning in early May, a black car rolled up the dirt road, its tires crunching on the gravel, followed by another. Men in uniforms stepped out, their faces serious, their hats casting shadows in the morning light. They spoke to Father in the parlor, their voices low but firm, their boots echoing in the hallway I knew too well. They asked to see the storage room, their eyes scanning the mattress, the curtain, the bare walls. They questioned John, Paul, and Mama Rose, their pens scratching on notepads, their questions sharp and pointed. I watched from the kitchen, my hands trembling as I peeled potatoes, my heart caught between fear and hope. Father denied everything, his voice calm but edged. With anger, his hands steady as he gestured to the farm. "This is a God-fearing family," he said, his eyes narrowing. "You're wasting your time with these rumors." But the whispers had started in Cedar Springs, spreading like wildfire through the church pews, the general store, the county fair. People looked at us differently, their heads bent together after Sunday service, their voices hushed but curious. The secret was out, a crack in Father's carefully built facade, and it couldn't be contained. Father never admitted anything, but the Fridays stopped, the storage room left untouched, its door locked and forgotten. The boys grew distant, their laughter quieter, their glances avoiding mine as if they too felt the weight of the truth. Some, like Paul, left for jobs in other towns, their bags packed in haste, their goodbyes brief. Charlie was sent to his mother in Louisville, a decision Father made abruptly, perhaps to silence him or to erase the reminder of his rebellion. I heard later that he found work in a factory, his mother's arms welcoming him home, a new life beginning far from the farm. I stayed until I was 18, counting the days until I could leave, each one a step toward freedom. I worked harder than ever, saving every penny I could from sewing for neighbors or selling eggs at the market, my hands steady, despite the scars I carried. When I finally left, I moved to a small town in Ohio, far from the red clay and the shadows of Cedar Springs. I worked as a seamstress, my needle flashing under lamplight, then as a school aide, finding solace in helping children learn to read, their laughter a balm to my wounds. I married a kind man, a carpenter with a gentle smile, who listened to my story without judgment, his hand steady in mine. We raised 2 daughters, strong and fearless, teaching them to speak their truths, to never let silence bind them. The pain of those years never fully leaves, like a bruise that fades but aches when the weather turns cold. But it's softened by time, by love, by the knowledge that I broke the cycle, that I found a way out when the walls felt unbreakable. I think of Charlie often, his quiet courage, his willingness to risk everything for me, and I hope he found peace in Louisville under a sky free of shadows. Telling this story wasn't easy, like opening an old wound to let it heal in the light. I share it because silence lets these things continue, lets the shadows grow long and heavy. If my words help even one person speak out, find help, or heal, it's worth it. I sent this story to the Echoes of Real Life's channel, asking them to change personal details to protect my privacy, and they kindly agreed. I'm so grateful for their understanding and for this space to share. My hope is that this story reminds us all to listen, to question, to protect those who need it most, and to never let silence be stronger than the truth.